It feels like sometimes people want to argue that the problems that exist today in American politics are artifacts of our system, whereas I would say that the problems that exist today in the American system are features of the system.
I think it's fine to teach critical race theory. I think the problem is that...
Did you ever see a lot of the letters that universities sent out related to the Rittenhouse stuff?
I didn't.
It was incredibly disappointing. So like a good college letter might be something like, he got like basically canceled over it. I think they forced his resignation. I don't know if he had a license pulled or something. I don't think it was that sort, but like he basically got kicked out of that college. And it was like, are you serious? Like this is absolutely f***ing insane. He seems like a really smart guy. When I've listened to him talk, he says a lot of stuff where it's like, this guy's really smart. I don't know why none of that translated to anything he said on the campaign trail, because oh my God, was he a buffoon. Do you know who Dean Mama is? Oh God, it's this conversation. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, democracy fun. I would say that like, I don't believe in democracy as a general rule. And what I mean by that is not necessarily that democracy is bad in all of its forms, but more fundamentally that democracy just like is a fantasy. And when it plays out in real life, it looks a lot more like oligarchy than anything else. So like, I would argue that in any political system, there's going to be some group of people who are more willing or more capable to influence the political system than anyone else. Does that seem plausible to you?
Yes.
Excellent. I'm glad you agree, because I think everything sort of builds out from this. But it's a fundamental critique to like someone like Vosh, who thinks democracy should be used for anything. If you create like a worker co-op where everyone has like democratic control and everything is equal, right?
Wait,
so you've like
wait.
eliminated.
Can I respond a little bit more to your last thing? Because I don't want to feel like I'm copying everything you're saying, okay?
Okay.
I think that in all forms of democracy, there's going to be some forms of like power that are going to be gotten in certain ways. So like in a capitalist country with democracy, we could argue that people with more money might be able to exert more either direct influence and that wealthy people are more likely to vote, or indirect influence and that they are more likely to have more prominent voices in society to influence people. But even in an idealized Vosh world where we would like eliminate all forms of like capitalist democracy, even in like a worker co-op, there's going to be people that are, we can say, have like more social currency than others. Like maybe a very charismatic leader is able to sway the votes of other people, or maybe somebody with like there's never in any conceivable system will there be like a one-to-one, every single person has exactly equal power through the whole strata of society. Depending on the type of society, there's always going to be some people that have more influence than other people, basically. Yeah.
Right. And I think it's a fantastic point about social capital, but it's deeper than that. And that there's going to be a great number of people who just are unwilling or, not interested in exercising democratic power.
Yeah.
So like we can only get something like 60% of people out to vote in a presidential election. It's much less for many state elections. And so most people are totally happy to just delegate that power control to outside forces, to representatives, and so on. So the idea that we'd like have worker or, the public deciding on things is just, it's a fantasy because people on average are not interested in deciding these things. But
or another way to say this might be more harshly, people always criticize like workers are dumb. And I think that might be a hyperbolic way of stating it, but like realistically, like most people don't want to learn the minutia of all the policies, even of their own workplace. A lot of people just want to show up, do their work, go home, have fun with their family, go out drinking on Friday, whatever, and then show up and do it again. And that's kind of what you do. I don't think everybody wants to be like this ultra empowered worker that is like making all these like, I'm super motivated and interested to know like where the hamburger patties are coming from my restaurant, and maybe we can make it environmentally more, like I don't think many people engage with it that way. Or
I think this is one problem with like a lot of the co-op or cooperative model discourse is that if you create like a co-op where people are working together and they're all voting collectively and they're all sharing like power over the company, chances are that kind of organization of a company is already selecting for people who are really engaged in wanting to do that. And if you were to like ever, impose that on people in general, most people would not be interested in that. So, I mean, I think we agree that like in any democratic system, there's going to be like a small people of who are really exercising power. I think you're one of these people, right? Like when you
I'm
go
very powerful.
to,
Absolutely.
well, you went to like Georgia and you canvassed like
Yeah.
crazy. And your canvassing is having, an enormous amount more impact than someone who just votes.
Or some loser who talks about it on the internet. Yeah.
Or some loser who just talks about it on the internet and doesn't mobilize anyone. Yeah. But I think interestingly too, you ran a candidate in Omaha, right? And did he ever actually get to being voted on by the general population?
No, I got axed from the campaign because somebody wrote a huge hit piece on me. And he almost lost his teaching job over it.
Well, I think this is like the perfect example because there's some people in
Well, I
our
mean, hold on.
culture.
He made it to the election, but I mean, like, yeah, he didn't win
Okay.
anything, but
But
you going, yeah.
he didn't win. He didn't have your support. So like despite your relative wealth and influence, like journalists and the press are able to like exert enormous control on the the political movings and dealings of our culture. I think this is like problematic because the press is able to influence so much power and the press is like in many ways beholden to like the university system, which is like producing journalists. And so you have like a very left-wing university system. It creates think tanks, right? Special interest groups. It creates a lot of the most economically elite people in our society. So, the high-level business interests. And it creates like journalists.
It does. I would argue
And
that I think that that's good. I mean, like, the idea that the press can serve as a check on big capital, I think is not bad. I think that's an okay thing.
yeah, I would say so too. I think the problematic part is that Americans have really bought their own hype. They're drinking their own Kool-Aid
Yeah, just
when it comes
recently,
to
or
democracy.
I mean, this is part of the
Yeah,
American
over
tradition.
time
Yeah.
for sure. But like Americans certainly seem to believe in this like conception of democracy as, free and open and like the power stemming from the people. But I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with this. There's a study that comes out of Princeton. It looks at almost 2,000 policy polls over, I think it's about a 20-year period. And what it finds is that the average voter's opinion on a specific position has almost no relevance to whether or not that position gets implemented in policy.
I
And
feel like
what,
I feel like
yeah.
we can go back and forth on those types of things, but okay, go for it.
Well,
I would disagree with the where we're going with that, but I don't know how relevant it's going to be to your next point. So
I mean, I'll elaborate. That's not to say that the average voter's opinion doesn't get implemented. It's to say that their position doesn't have way on whether it does or doesn't. So when the average voter, when their position on a policy decision coincides with the position of specifically special interest groups, so like the NRA or the AARP or so on, when it coincides with these groups or coincides with the interests of economic elites, that's when it gets implemented. And so the paper finds that like consistently the average, voters' policy preferences do get implemented, but it doesn't matter if, 30% of voters believe in it or 90%. It's about the same rate as far as whether or not it's going to get implemented or not. And what really matters is whether it has backing from economic elites and special interest groups.
that might be the case, but I feel like the interplay between those two groups are very important.
Okay,
Is this the Gillinson Page study?
I believe so, yes.
Do you know who Sockdon Left is?
I,
Him, and there have been
yes.
other people that have made responses to this, kind of like breaking down why maybe it's not quite as dire as this study points to. But fuck, I don't know how much we want to dig into all of that. I think that whether or not groups support certain things and whether or not people support certain things and what gets passed as policy, I think is really complicated because of how complicated our system is. And I don't think it's as easy to say like there's a one-to-one draw on like there's a one-to-one comparison. We're like, this is what the public wants, and this is what happens.
Mhm.
For a variety of reasons. We can say one is because population desire doesn't matter because we have like 50 individual states, right? So say
Mhm.
60% of the population wants something, but that's overrepresented in blue states, and then the Senate doesn't resemble that desire. It's obviously not going to happen. Now, whether that's a good or bad thing is a separate discussion, but it's not just because like the elites are against it. It's because of the population split and how we've got the Senate set up. Another thing might be that a lot of people are in favor of a certain thing, but there are other issues that are more important, so that thing doesn't get passed. So for instance, it might be the case today that the majority of Americans are supporting legalization, I think, of at least marijuana, but like there might be other issues, especially the conservatives, that are more important to vote on, so they'll vote for like an anti-marijuana guy because it's more important to them that like certain things get passed related to the economy or tax cuts or something. The biggest challenge that I usually try to think up of, so like if I'm reading research on something or studies or something, usually I try to back up and I try to think like on a macro level, like can I think of stories, or can I think of like, does this seem to be true, or am I like getting lost in the weeds? When I think about like whether or not the average voter is represented in the in like the government, I try to think of like, are there huge policies that the government passes that everybody's against, but for some reason, either special interests or corporate elites sort of manage to get it passed in Congress? I can't really find examples of this ever happening. I can find examples of policies on the edges where there's not a lot of like public fervor, there's not a lot of public interest, where maybe you'll find like here where special interests can really work their magic. So like, let's say for instance, we're talking about, should we ban the ability to drill oil from, surfaces in the ocean that are between 5,000, like something like that. Like, okay, now a special interest can work in Congress and lobby and do this, and most people don't know or care, so maybe they can get some headway. But in terms of like, every American really wants this thing and we just can't get it passed through Congress, I think that that's largely a fabrication of polling data, of asking questions in a specific way, and then people run with that and they go like, oh look, well you can see that like the government doesn't represent the will of the people. The most salient example I can think of is Medicare for all, where like if you ask somebody like, should the government provide healthcare to everybody or free healthcare to everybody, it pulls at like 74%. But if you ask it at the other extreme, it's like, should the government ban all private insurance and make government insurance mandatory? It's like 24%. So yeah, I think I'm not as dire on like, does the government represent the will of the people? I don't know how important this point is for the rest of your argument. I can assume that it's true. We can move on from here, or we can fight on this if you want.
Yeah, I mean, just to like clarify a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
the polling data used in this study
Mm-hmm.
is careful not to include polling data that use like strong hypotheticals.
Mm-hmm.
So like an example with like Medicare would be like, would you support a government option if it meant you could never use private insurance again,
Mm-hmm.
right? That polls like quite negatively. And so this specific study was careful not to use like those sort of hypotheticals in the polls that they include. But I've also seen criticism of the study, and usually the criticism breaks down to saying something like, it'll say something like, well, if you look at wealthy Americans and their positions, they also weren't highly represented in the government policy decisions, which is also true, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's missing the point of the paper, right? And the point of the paper is not that wealthy people have their policy positions implemented. In fact, the point of the paper is specifically that that's not the case, right? It's only like in the specific alignment of like economic elites and special interest groups. And so like you're also right that special interest groups, they're not passing legislation that is like broadly unpopular.
Mm-hmm.
Because also that's not their job, right? Like if there's a special interest group for like farm subsidies, that's not relevant to most Americans.
Mm-hmm.
It's relevant to farmers and it's relevant to like voters in Kansas,
Mm-hmm.
but not really relevant elsewhere. So, I mean, your point is like correct. The special interest groups tend to represent like sort of niche issues, but like that's, by definition, their job is to represent these like sort of niche
Mm-hmm.
border issues.
There's a guy he's a data nerd in my chat. I don't argue against this guy because he's right about everything else, so you can argue with him too. One of the problems that he's pointing out, or I didn't mean to say that as if like he's knocking down your argument, but this guy seems to do a lot of this kind of stuff. He says, what if my criticism of the study is that the model in the paper has an R squared of 0.07, meaning the variance in variables is associated with 7% of the variance in outcomes. So simply that the evidence is insufficient to support the claim, and then he's linking a paper. I don't want to dig too hard into this. I don't know how true or untrue this is, or...
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure.
Okay,
So
let's move past that. We don't have to worry about that. For the broader claim, I guess.
oh, okay.
Uh-huh. I was gonna say, for the broader claim of what you're saying, do you think, or can you think of, just so we're a bit grounded, I guess, in the policy, can you think of some stuff where it's like, this is legislation that should have passed, obviously, but didn't, or this is legislation that definitely shouldn't have passed, but somehow did, that would show like, well, look, I think that the elites or some ruling body is kind of like corrupting the government here? Do you have any examples of that, or can you think of anything like that?
I mean, I think if you want to broaden it out to like, so we're not like in the weeds with, sorry, messing with my camera. So we're not in the weeds with like a very specific data argument. I would just say that like it's only natural that in a political system, the people who have the most power and the most willingness to influence the politics are going to. And we've established that like hypothetically and with your sort of, conversing with you, where we agree that these like special interest groups who are highly motivated are probably going to work a lot harder to influence politics than like if you take a broad opinion poll, on Americans on any issue, you're going to get a lot of people who, on the paper or on the phone, they'll say, yeah, I want this, right? But they're not necessarily going to go out or vote or make their voice heard in politics. So I think this understanding of like America and democracy as a whole as something that is in large part influenced by like the interests of people who are highly motivated and highly capable. I think it's an important thing to recognize because
Do you think, or do you worry that like when you see, say, somebody like Donald Trump get elected, this is somebody who I think was opposed like by literally everybody in the establishment. The media hated him. Both parties hated him. But the people, at least the Republican Party, seemed to like be super obsessed with him, and that was enough for him to make it through and break through all the processes. Does somebody like that challenge
but then look
that
at like what the people wanted, right? So like the people who voted for Donald Trump, they voted for him on the promises that he would build the wall and drain the swamp. And what did we get? And probably also like withdraw from Afghanistan, stop being so interventionist, which he started the process of. Give him credit for that. But he didn't drain the swamp. He didn't like crack down on corruption, and he didn't build the wall. So these are like broadly popular things, which people are voting for him on, which didn't get implemented. And of course, he can't do that without the allyship of a great number of people in the Senate and in the House. And that allyship comes with the allyship of broader establishment, right? Broader establishment that's able to create canvassing groups to get politicians who are supportive elected. And so
I
on.
agree with that, but I think the thing that so this is going to be the broader trend of every argument I make. I agree that what you're saying is true. I don't agree that those things are like their own kind of thing that exists as kind of like these like political vampires. I would say that these things exist because they draw so much power from the groups that tend to support them. So like we hate the fact that like McConnell has so much power, or that whatever politicians, we hate them, Manchin or Sinema. But the reality is they're not there as just like a foil to the system to show us how the illusion of democracy that we live under. They're there because they draw their power in real part from people that actually do support these politicians.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. And what you're getting at is this like understanding of American politics as something that is like highly regionalized,
For sure.
and highly like fractured and like pushed to the local level. So like voters in West Virginia who elected Joe Manchin and liked Joe Manchin because he's this moderate guy, their positions in politics are, I mean, those voters probably feel highly represented right now. They can look at the political system and say, wow, yeah, my positions, glad I voted for this guy. Like he's stopping bills, he's like representing my interests. But if you're a voter in California, of which there are many more, or a voter in New York, right? These voters are less represented.
Sure, because of the structure of our
balance.
Senate and even the Electoral College too, arguably, sure.
And so I agree that like you're pointing out that the structure encourages this kind of political fracturing. And I would say that the end result of that political fracturing is that the interests of special interest groups and economic elites are more represented in the data.
Okay, let's go to the next parts of this, and we'll see if we agree or disagree on places, I guess. Well, I guess, or maybe this is where we so I fundamentally, I believe that my broader narrative is I believe that the American system is actually highly effective. I think that it does what it wants to do exceedingly well. And I think that all of the problems that we're seeing aren't, it feels like sometimes people want to argue that the problems that exist today in American politics are artifacts of our system. Whereas I would say that the problems that exist today in the American system are features of the system. So for instance, like when we say that like we have a Congress that can't pass any legislation, I would say that that's true, but that probably should be the case because we have a historically divided America. Yeah, so I think a lot of what I'm going to say is like, I'll agree that like, yeah, there are problems, but I would argue that the problems come from the people, not the system. And that the only way to be able to rectify those problems is going to be to like fundamentally change like how we weight different people's, I guess, voices, which some people would argue we already do weight them a little bit differently because of the Senate and the presidency. And I guess we could talk about that more specifically if you want, but yeah, okay, cool.
Well, if I can take this in a little bit of a different direction,
Yeah, go for it.
I don't necessarily think it's a problem that the average voter is not being represented in Congress or in the policies that are implemented, right? If we agree that like on balance, there's like some voters who are going to be more represented, some voters that aren't. And
yeah,
you know,
I probably
people,
would agree with that, yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, you know, we agree that there's like not this like overwhelming representation of like majority will. I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. But what I think we need to do is recognize that and recognize the influences on American politics as real. So like I talked about this a little bit earlier, but like the university system and like elite universities, which produce think tanks, journalists, you know, economic elites, and so on. These universities and the beliefs taught in them have enormous impact on the kind of bills that end up getting written and debated. And so I think if you want to understand, you know, how bills are really created, you have to first understand like the influence of these elite educational institutions. And when we look at America and its history of, I know this is contentious, but like, you know, leftward positioning, where like if you were to take a conservative from 60 years ago who, you know, 60 years ago, or I guess like 80 years ago, who's opposing like segregation, you know, they're going to, or is opposing desegregation. Take them, put them in today, they're going to be on the extreme, like fringe far right.
Yeah.
And in general, I think, you know, 20 years ago, and they're opposing gay marriage. Even liberals like Obama are not explicitly for gay marriage. If you were to take a liberal who's like against gay marriage, put them in present time, they're going to be, again, on like the weird far right, or they're going to be in like the weird excluded part of their party. And so I think that we need to understand that like this leftward shift is really, it's coming from the universities. And I think that produces like a number of problems. So I don't know if you saw, there's this like Jordan Peterson video that was released where he talks about like diversity, equity, and inclusion policies.
Okay.
Things like affirmative action, right? And committees that say that we need X amount of Black or brown representation in our schooling. Those kind of committees and those kind of requirements, which place skin color as a more important quality, or an important quality that can sometimes take precedence over test scores or aptitude, is the kind of thing that I think undermines the meritocracy and the legitimacy of the kinds of policies that are coming down from educational institutions. And so when you have like a massive replication crisis in social sciences, and these social sciences are also having a massive impact on American policy, I think that's when you have like some issue.
Yeah, so there's a couple parts. So I think that there are legitimate conversations to have about affirmative action. I don't know if I would say that it's always like, it's just like on its own principle, like a bad thing. that might be a separate conversation we could have. I do think that some of the diversity and equitable things are a little bit cringe when you're trying to specific like. So I think in California they try to say like every company board should have at least one woman on it or something like that. Is like kind of weird. There's that, and then oh god, fuck. What was the second part of what you said? What did you end with?
Oh, it's a little bit scary to me that it's like eroding the sort of meritocracy. And I
Oh,
don't think it's a problem if
uh-huh.
like elites and special interest groups are having a huge impact on politics, as long as those elites and special interest groups are, demonstrated to be highly educated and effective at delivering good policy.
Hmm.
And so when you have like an erosion of institutions as credible sources of knowledge, that's when I think it becomes problematic for these areas to have, an outsized influence.
Hmm.
Does that seem plausible to you?
Um.
A lot to think about.
So reforming it, the idea is that society is moving more left, and you believe that the reason why society is moving more left is because policymakers are overrepresented from places of educational institutions.
That are very left wing. Yeah.
Don't there exist like pretty right wing like think tanks and things like I think the Heritage Foundation or like the Cato Institute? Like, aren't these relatively educated bodies? Also in schools,
Yeah.
isn't usually the meme isn't usually said that like your econ department or your business department tends to be a bit more conservative than like the rest of the school?
Yeah. I
Um,
mean, these are both true things.
mhm. I guess like one of the scary things is that like I think I can agree with you a little bit on principle. I guess I would one question, or I could agree with you a little bit into what you're saying, but then one question would be like, is it my fault or should I care if it's overrepresented on the left right now when the right just seems to be just so batshit fucking insane? So like for instance, I think it's really important to have two strong opposition forces to figure out good agreement in the middle. I think that's incredibly important, but I don't think that the
Mhm.
Republicans offer a sane alternative to the left at the moment. I think there's good conversations to be had about like, okay, climate change is real, but we need to be mindful of the economic harm, or there does exist some level of like racial disparity in the United States, but maybe the answer isn't like mass affirmative action and like rioting all over the place. Like, I think that these things are important to think about, but it feels like sometimes that I don't get good alternatives on the right because it's just like like climate change is totally fake and it's a hoax by China and the Wuhan virus was made by China and it's like okay, well fuck, well, where's my opposition party here that I can that I feel like represents a good pull against the left in the United States at the moment.
Yeah, this is a good point. I think you have to be like, in a way, sort of crazy or weird to be
A
on the
conservative,
right.
yeah, unfortunately,
Um,
or not a conservative, but to be a Republican, yeah.
Sure, but also, I mean, to be like someone who seriously questions democratic institutions, you have to be already a little bit weird to do that, or very willing to search for the truth if it might contradict,
Hmm.
what you've been told. Because, you grow up, you're in elementary school, and you get this like nice little prepackaged understanding of the American Revolution
Hmm.
and democracy and how our system works. And that perception of like power flowing from the people is something that gets reinforced over and over. And to question that at all, I think already puts you probably in a camp of maybe being a little bit weird. And so it's not surprising to me that also like a lot of these people believe, other very strange things.
Hmm.
But I mean, just because like it might be a little bit weird, I don't think we need to necessarily like throw the baby out with the bathwater. What we really need is like a serious intellectual movement from the right.
Yeah.
And I would love if right wingers could work together to model a way of intellectually conceptualizing the world
Hmm.
that is able to paint a compelling narrative to contend with the left wing. And the left wing, like, they have a lot of, intellectuals and people who are very smart and very good at analyzing data and people who are producing studies and left wingers who are peer reviewing the studies and publishing them and so on. And so there's certainly a left wing intellectual movement, and it grants a lot of credence to left wing ideas. So, like I mentioned, like the replicability crisis in sociology.
Hmm.
The other half of that is that, like, a lot of people in social sciences are starting out as people who are progressives. So the kind of questions that they're going to ask, the kind of data that they're going to search for, and the kind of data that they're going to find legitimate or not legitimate in a study is going to be biased, I think, in some way towards the left wing.
Sure. I
And
will. Something that I'll challenge real quick before we get too far on this one, though.
mhm,
I feel like the replication crisis is wielded a little bit too much by people on the right as a way to discourage the social sciences, when I think the replication crisis, what it's supposed to point to, is an issue with potentially the peer review process.
mhm.
Everybody likes to point to the social sciences having a lot of issues with replicating studies, but that was ubiquitous among all sciences, even like physics and chemistry. The percentages weren't as high, but they were scary. It was still like, I think 20, 30, 40, 50% for like
It's
some.
like an order of magnitude difference. But yeah, there is
Well,
a problem in both.
there might even be like a clean Wikipedia page on this, but I thought it was like in some of the social sciences it was like 50 or 60%, but I think like in some of the harder sciences it was still like 20 or 30%. So there was a big difference in the social sciences, but it was shockingly high for the harder sciences as well. And I think the problem was just that I feel like the replication crisis, everybody uses it to attack sociology, but I feel like the bigger problem was just that publishing like verifying experiment results is not very sexy. There's not a lot of like money in like verifying the results of certain experiments. There's not a lot of excitement in doing that. So like that's like a critique of how we raise money and do grants and everything for our system. It's not necessarily like the slam dunk, like, look, sociology is garbage, that I feel like a lot of people represent the replication crisis as being. If you have a source or a link on that where I'm totally wrong on that, feel free to correct me. But
I don't know the exact numbers, but you're absolutely right that there's like a problem with the peer review process in this way and also in this incentive structure. So like another example that I've heard given is that like if you're getting grants for a study that's going to show that like chocolate is really good for you. That's like great, exciting news. It's going to be published everywhere. So there's like a massive incentive for that. And so sort of like you see this a lot in like health sciences where you go back and forth on like publishing that this food is like really great or this food or that, and it makes headlines. It's good for getting money, people like it, right? So there's this like incentive structure in place to sort of look for results that are going to look good. And so like they talk about like p hacking, right? And or maybe like getting lots of different variables and just seeing like which one, you throw them at the wall until something works, and so on. And so I mean, like there's a study about like names and whether or not you're more or less likely to get hired based off of a job application, based on like whether your name is traditionally associated with
a
this
super
racial group
famous,
or
yeah.
that racial group. Now, I think these studies have been proven to have a pretty consistent effect, but it's very easy to imagine a world where you just like throw lots of names at the wall. You send in lots and lots of applications, and eventually you're going to get a really black sounding name. And just by chance, it's going to get far fewer, application requests or interview requests. And you compare that then to your like whitest sounding name that also got the most interview requests. And you draw this conclusion that like, wow, we sent this to like so many people, and the p-value is so low that the chance of this happening randomly is so low. But then you omit the fact that you like also included so many other names that didn't have relevant factors. Now, this is like a hypothetical scenario because I think that this evidence has been suggested to be like pretty firm and like pretty good. But, it's an example of how you can test many variables and search for the kind of result that you want. So, I mean, when we look at like the political bias of these institutions, I think it's again problematic because there's this peer review process that people are going to be more incentivized to know, well, my peers, they tend to be more progressive people. And so if I want my study to be published, I know that, in some small way, and it might be very small, there's going to be an edge given to papers that are validating progressive worldviews.
Yeah, that definitely could potentially be an issue. I agree that it is. It's just hard to find the solution to that sometimes when the mainstream Republican views are so detached from reality. Like, it's refreshing and fun to have intelligent conversations with conservatives sometimes. But god damn, like somebody like take for instance like the idea behind like trickle down wealth for like a strategy for getting money to poor people. It's just like empirically and even case by case. Like if you've ever had any experience running a business, you know that this is like a ridiculous way to do wealth transfer. It's never going to happen. You're never going to willingly increase the cost of doing business as an employer. You just wouldn't do that. But so many Republicans still buy into this, or anything related to so many of the sciences and everything too, where you run into these issues of like just the Republican Party is so anti-intellectual and anti-institution and anti-university. I don't know what the solution is to that or how you break through that to like establish a healthy Republican mindset where it's like, hey, it's okay to engage with science and not be like a crazy reality denier. Like there are conservative answers to some of these questions. They can exist, but you have to do the work to find them. I don't know what the answer to that is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I would say the answer is just making sure that universities are very neutral spaces.
Yeah,
So,
that shit is fucked now.
I mean, think about like, there's been lots of discourse about critical race theory. And I'll say, as someone who's like more right-leaning, that I don't necessarily think that critical race theory should be banned in schools. I think it's fine to teach critical race theory. I think the problem is that the professors who teach critical race theory are true believers in critical race theory. And you'll rarely find a professor who is teaching critical race theory who is not, as part of the theory, engaging in something called praxis, right? Like theory and action mix.
It'd be
And
like, so
so,
like we would say that like learning about Catholicism in college is probably a good thing. We should learn about religions, but people would probably feel a little bit differently about it if it was like Catholic priests teaching about Catholicisms or like imams coming in and teaching about Islam or whatever. It'd be like, wait, hold on a second. I don't know how I feel. Now it feels a little bit different. There's a different character. Yeah.
yeah, precisely. Where the students should not be like propagandized towards. Or even if like a professor is trying their best to be neutral, say like, someone raises their hand in class and they express an opinion that is supportive of the critical race theory that they're teaching. And they say, okay, yeah, good, thanks for sharing. And then someone raises their hand and expresses a viewpoint that is critical of the theory that's being taught. And then the professor, who, frankly speaking, is probably going to know a lot more, is going to be much more informed, much more capable of having a conversation about it, then the professor will publicly,
Shit on.
debate or question the student.
It's like the old
Right?
meme of like, one day a brave atheist stood up in class and tried to challenge the professor on, the professor said God doesn't believe in evil, and then the professor left the classroom shaking. Except in reality, it's always the other way around. Yeah, I largely agree with this. I think I largely agree with what you're saying. I think something that upset me a lot, it's happened with other things, but I'm more familiar with the Rittenhouse stuff since we talked about it so much. But did you ever see a lot of the letters that universities sent out related to the Rittenhouse stuff?
I didn't.
It was incredibly disappointing. So like a good college letter might be something like, there was a very challenging verdict that came out of a court case. Like we invite everybody to discuss and share their feelings on it, make sure that the debate is healthy, make sure whatever, like make sure that you stay, as dispassionate as possible because we are intellectuals in college, blah, blah, blah. That wasn't the case at all. It was like people were sending out emails where it's like a very troubling and upsetting verdict came out of the white supremacist justice systems of the United States today. We understand that many students are going to be traumatized by this. Health counselors are standing by. And I'm like, bro, are you fucking serious? I think even my college, my alma mater or whatever, I don't know if I can say that if I flunked, but even my college, like the letter that they sent, I was like, are you actually serious? It was basically everybody was saying that like Rittenhouse is like this white supremacist Nazi murderer, and it was the worst verdict ever in all of human history, and there was no room for conversation. Like that was it. Like they sent the letters out and that's it, boom. And rather than having like college be a place where we can explore and debate ideas, it's become like way more, this is the narrative and this is what everybody's going to believe, and if you don't, then fuck you, or you're going to get canceled, or you're going to get whatever. Yeah. A similar thing is unfortunately happening inside the ACLU in the United States today, I would say. But where the ACLU is coming out and making statements about stuff that, quite frankly, they just have no business talking about. I don't give a fuck about the ACU's like place on like racial equality or whatever. That's not what the ACLU was originally ever designed to deal with. But now they seem way more concerned with like social justice than what they were originally for, which was really the defense of the First Amendment and then kind of the Second Amendment. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, part of it too is just universities are trying to attract students. And students tend to be young people tend to be very progressive.
Yeah.
And so if you're a university that is neutral, is challenging or just neutral on these sorts of issues, that's going to like ultimately hurt your bottom line.
Mm-hmm.
And so the incentive is always for universities to take these like more left-wing stances.
Yeah.
And again, like I think understanding that relationship between universities and the most successful, powerful people in society, right? Like, I mean, just like on the basis of your average college graduate's going to earn more, right? And be more likely to engage in politics, to have much more influence in politics than another person who's
Mm-hmm.
not college educated.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you understand that, like, well, there are these incentive structures in place for universities to be very left wing, I think you start to understand and to validate left wing beliefs, right, through studies.
Mm-hmm.
I think you start to understand how we've gotten to this point where it just seems like so crazy to be a conservative.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got this like cultural force that is so supportive of the progressive movement.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, like more than that, I think in regards to choosing politicians, it seems to me that there's like if I were to hire for a company, right, and I wanted my CEO to deliver like good results for the company, I would not go to the general public, the American public, and like do a poll on who should be our CEO. I'd probably like create a committee and I would do interviews for people, look at their qualified, past experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd hire based on that. And I would create like a high degree of financial
Mm-hmm.
incentivization to do well in the company. And I would fire them easily if they were not able to deliver.
Yeah.
So,
Have you ever seen the
yeah,
movie Sunshine?
I have not.
Oh fuck! There's a really funny moment in this movie. It's an interesting movie, but it's reminding me of what you're saying. There was a funny moment where they have to decide whether or not they want to embark. On a really risky part of their like space mission. And at one point, one of the characters says, "All right, well, we're going to take a vote on this." And then another character shuts him down and it's like, "We're not going to fucking vote on this. Like, we're a group of highly trained scientists. We're going to make the most informed decision we can. And we're going to go with that." So it kind of playing into what you're saying. Like, if we wanted to figure out what the best thing to do for business, we wouldn't just like throw it up to a vote. Like, we would have a committee of specially trained people that would be evaluating based on known metrics or whatever for what decision you want to make moving forward. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And I think we've got like a system in America where sort of there are like intellectual powerhouses in the universities that try to give like the best kinds of policy based on data to politicians and to think tanks and so on. But, the erosion of meritocracy in these institutions, I think is probably a serious problem for the legitimacy of that.
Potentially, yeah. I think there's a balancing act for all of it, but like, I don't think there are times where forcing some level of diversity. I think there are times when forcing some level of diversity can produce positive outcomes, because markets sometimes can be slow to react to things. Like there have been a lot of studies showing that you can fudge the minimum wage a bit higher than it is and have almost no downside on any of the workers. There was a popular one that was looking at restaurants between, I want to say it was New Jersey and New York or something, but it was like two neighboring cities. So like there was so much in the controls that were the same for both. And I think the minimum wage bumped up like $2 or $3 higher, or it might have been New Jersey and Pennsylvania. Yeah, the minimum wage bumped up higher for one state, and there was almost no negative impact on unemployment at all. So there's like an example of like where maybe the markets aren't always as steadfastly rational as we'd like them to be, and they can be a little slow. So a nudge in one direction is good. But I mean, I definitely agree that it goes a little bit too far in the other direction sometimes, for sure. I wouldn't argue with that. Or it has gone incredibly far in one direction right now. Yeah.
Mhm. And again, like I wouldn't necessarily say that democracy is bad per se, but that people need to be really cognizant of how a democracy is actually working in practice and the understanding of like democracy as a system that inherently tends towards oligarchy. I think can help deconstruct people's views that like democracy is some principal goal of which society needs to be oriented towards, and maybe introduce people to new lines of thinking that, well, maybe we can create systems that are less democratic, but might have ultimately similar outcomes, provided there are still checks and balances on the kind of oligarchic power which is putting policy into place.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I would necessarily understand. I fight with a lot of people sometimes who don't understand how our system works, and then sometimes people can get distraught with the system without even knowing how it works. So, for instance, we might have a federal election, and then people are upset about why criminal justice or policing policies haven't changed at all. And it's like the federal government has nothing to do with how cities and states run their individual police forces. Yeah, it's all local. And then understanding who votes is very important. So, white, affluent people, white, affluent, educated people tend to be like the most represented voters. So like when you're looking at a city and you see that only like 24% of people voted in the last election, well, we can guess that it's going to be heavily weighted towards a certain population. Oh, white, affluent, and older people. That was the third one I was looking for. And then when we start to see like who's voting in these elections, what we actually see is it's not very surprising that nothing is being done about like, say, criminal justice, because old white people don't get arrested. They don't give a fuck about the criminal justice system. So yeah, it's good to have like a realistic understanding of what the system is actually doing, so that you can either engage with it in a way to change it, or I guess like at least hate it for the right reasons. Yeah.
I read a book a while back, actually on I think your suggestion or your community's suggestion, called "Politics is for Power."
Oh,
And
that was my
in the
suggestion.
book,
Yeah. That's a good book.
huh?
That was my
Oh
suggestion.
yeah,
Don't
but
give
in
my
the
community credit for my shit. Okay.
your shit. In the book, they talk about this like case of this union guy, and in the city that he's in, like the ability to get elected or to get policy passed is like massively dependent on him, and getting him to like get his community to rally behind you. And I think this is like another, I mean, that book is just like full of examples of how necessary it is to have like the influential people in your local district, supporting you if you want to get anything done.
Oh,
And I've
was this
also,
the older guy that was like foreign born, where they talked about how
yeah,
like the mayor would send people to like shovel this dude's driveway because yeah.
yeah, totally. It's just like it's so striking how like single individuals can have so
So
much
much
impact.
power. And he started, I think, it's been a while since I've read it, but I think that guy started from like when he immigrated over 20 or 30 years ago. I think he was just helping people fill out like mail-in forms or something. He just like, so people around the community started to know him, and I think they called him the boss or something. People would like go to him for help with like small things. But eventually he wielded a significant amount of local power, such that there were local politicians that would skirt him or not skirt him, try to like appease him for like favors and shit. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And like I've done some like local politics stuff as well. And I think anyone who's worked in these like areas knows like just how much power like single individuals can have, or like small groups. Like the city council might be elected and like might have their positions because of only like 10% of the city.
Yeah.
And it's just like, in a sense, it's like democratic because everyone can vote, but realistically, that is not what happens.
And when you're
So when
talking about
people,
like a city and it's 10% of the city is voting, and then you only need like 40% theoretically, depending on how the primaries go, that like one person that's like connected to 200 or 300 people can represent like a huge voter block. Yeah. Whereas federally, we're so obsessed with the like winning by 100,000 votes or 300,000 votes, or this like in a city level, it's the elections are way fucking closer. Yeah.
yeah. So we need like mechanisms to get politicians out of office if they're doing poorly. But the idea that like our politicians do good because like the majority of people support them and the majority of people like tend to have the right positions or are representing their own like interests is just like not at all accurate to the actual reality of politics.
Sure.
Good stuff. I'm glad you agree with me on these issues.
I'll agree on a lot of the issues. This is why I'm so popular among conservatives these days, I guess. I'll agree on a lot of the issues. I guess what we fight sometimes is what the solution should be. Yeah, because I do think that like, and I think even you largely agree. Like Republicans are just fucking crazy.
A
Like,
lot of times, yeah.
so when we talk about like liberals and far left people are way overrepresented in these institutions, I'm not going to disagree with that. I absolutely agree with that. But like,
You're like, good. Hell yeah.
yeah, but like, do I want Republicans there instead? Fuck no. Like, like some dude that's talking about how like black people need to learn math differently because he's like super bought into some weird CRT shit. That's super cringe. But like the other dude who's like, black people should be fully caught up with white people at this point. There's no reason for them to be doing bad other than the fact that there's black and their culture sucks. It's like, I don't know about that one either, Chief. Yeah, the lack of sane alternative like really drives me fucking crazy. It's really bad. It really upsets me because we shouldn't be as fucked as we are today politically, but we are because the right has no good answers to anything. They're garbage. Trump is fucking insane. Like the guy didn't believe in climate change. He lied up until he couldn't anymore that like the virus was fake, that nobody was actually sick in America. Just like it's just so horrible. Yeah, I don't know. Just it drives me crazy that there's no viable alternative on the other end.
You think like a good start might be to create more transparency in like the schooling system or in some way mandate that there's like a little bit more representation of conservative or right-leaning views just to counteract the natural tendency of these organizations to be left-wing.
I don't even know if you could do that. I feel like if you were to even suggest that, I think people would like start killing themselves. Like the idea of like having to share a platform with somebody that like isn't 100% the most woke left person possible.
Isn't that quite bad?
Yeah, it is. It's the
Yeah.
university stuff in the U.S. has gotten unbelievably out of control recently. Over the past like it's been a long time coming, I guess, but especially over the past like 5 years since Trump for sure.
Yeah,
Do you know anything about that Brett Weinstein guy?
a little bit, but not a
This
ton.
annoying fucking moron, super dipshit. But like how he got his start, his claim to fame. Did you ever hear anything about this? Like where he came from, kind of?
I don't think so.
His fucking the fucking university he was a part of. They had like a long time ago, black people weren't allowed to go to school because it was segregated, and so their school they wanted to celebrate this history by having a day where white people weren't supposed to go to school. And I think he opposed that on obvious grounds because that's fucking cringe. And he got like basically canceled over it. I think they forced his resignation. I don't know if he had a license pulled or something. I don't think it was that serious, but like he basically got kicked out of that college. And it was like, are you serious? Like this is absolutely fucking insane. I don't
But
know
that
how you would.
contributes to this, like, you know, when the left does like fucking insane things, right? It gives credence to the right to also do fucking insane
Crazy things.
things.
Yeah, it does. It absolutely does. So like when I try to argue that like BLM is important, and then people on the left are saying things like when some other shooting happens and it's like obviously the guy fucked up and the cops probably did what they needed to do, and then people want to defend like the Makia girl that that stabbed the other fucking girl, and people are like, oh, another pig cop, blah blah blah. It's like, okay, fuck. Like the
Like,
most
what is she supposed to do?
Yeah.
Let her stab her?
yeah, the most annoying thing is that like I have to fight on both ends. I've explained this while arguing with my mom, where any conversation I have with my mom, I have to immediately concede like 15 crazy things the left has done before trying to convince her that the right is also crazy. And you're already like lost at that point. You look horrible. I remember there was the huge one with my mom that took a while for her to get over, was the high school students that were demonized by CNN about near it was like the Indian protesters or whatever.
Yeah.
And they tried to shoot this video that made it look like they were being unbelievably antagonistic, and it basically was
Like
the
the
exact
smirking kid.
yeah. And this kid was like fucking 16 or some shit. I was like, are you serious? I don't know. Yeah, it's very 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 fucking annoying. It's hard to explain to people that like you are doing an actual damage to your movement when you act like fucking lunatics. You're actually destroying your movement by acting in this way. It's very irritating to try to make people understand that.
Well, in a way, I think the movement survives, but the movement becomes like more predicated on falsehoods. And that like those sort of like false things and misinformation just contribute to like a culture of toxicity and a culture of like degradation of truth and like valuable, virtues in society. So like if you are constantly spewing misinformation, you legitimize the other side to also spew misinformation.
Yep.
And, on balance, these two ideas can like compete with each other if they're both agreeing to like spew misinformation. But it's like worse for everyone as an end result. And so personally, I think it would be really good to see like more transparency in schools as far as what is being taught, how it's being taught. I also think it'd be good to create some sort of system, and I'm not exactly sure how you'd implement this, but some kind of incentive for colleges to open up to a broader diversity of opinions and to counterweigh some of that progressive shift in universities.
I think the issue is that I think the issue is capitalism and democracy. So this is where I'll break with my analysis from the right is when people complain about this, I think the problem is that our democracy is incredibly effective, and a lot of our markets are really effective too, which I think makes it hard to alleviate this problem. Like you said before, there is a huge selection criterion that goes on with kids when they think about like the reputations of schools and everything, and it's hard to tell schools, well, we need you to act a little bit more proper. And make sure you're maintaining a neutrality of viewpoints when they're like, I could do that, but also my business is going to fucking fail, you know? It's kind of like how on one end, I'll criticize the fuck out of companies for buckling, sometimes to public pressure over, you know, stupid college kids crying about some shit. But on the other hand, it's like, okay, well, if you are a publicly traded company, you get a board of shareholders, and you look like you're about to lose money because some employee, you know, accidentally used the word blacks instead of black Americans or black people. It's like, okay, well, fuck, I guess I'm a little bit empathetic because if our market system works, like, you know, maybe they have to act in that way. It's a hard problem to correct for when I think that they're just responding to how society is acting sometimes, you know? Like they technically, in a free market democratic system, colleges are doing the right thing. They should be censoring conservatives as much as possible because conservative viewpoints can be harmful to a business's bottom line, and a business does only exist to make money for the shareholders. So there has to be some like third-party government intervention there or something to stop it, because I don't think I would ever expect the market to solve for it.
I think this is a great insight. And actually, I break from the right here too, as well. I don't know if you've been following on Twitter, like the discourse around SNAP benefits and like health and
Shit.
security and stuff.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think a lot of companies have a lot of incentive to create like not nutritionally beneficial, but actually like incredibly addicting, you know, dangerous food that
Ultra
is
high in
not going
sugar.
to,
Yeah, of course.
yeah, not really going to sate people, give them energy, not going to help people like in the long term. And so this is like another case where like the market clearly has incentives for something, but those incentives contribute to a degradation of society as a whole. I mean, that's like dramatic, right? But like what I'm saying is that like there's an incentive to create food that is not going to help people. It's going to satiate their immediate pleasures. And in some sense, like the ideal business model for short-term profits and gain is the opium den. And the closer you can get to the opium den, if you're creating a social media platform that's highly addictive, that appeals to people, keeps them scrolling for hours, you know, you don't necessarily care about the well-being.
Yeah, this is why I get so fucking upset every time I see somebody else shitting on Facebook. Like, people are like, why is Facebook playing into the fake news? It's like, bro, their job is to get you to click shit. Like, if the last vanguard of American democracy is a private firm whose goal is to show you as much radical shit as possible to keep you clicking on ads, like, you're fucked. You're so fucked. It's like a fundamental misunderstanding of what you expect different actors in a market to do. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. It's really upsetting to me that people don't know that sometimes. So you'll get people relentlessly shitting on Facebook for doing what we would expect Facebook to do in any business environment, acting as any firm should. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And like, if Facebook is creating this product that's highly addictive in the economy, that's represented by like GDP increasing as people consume more and are willing to consume more, and people are like, you know, advertisers are buying more space on the platform and so on, right? So it's represented by these like economic metrics as something that's good. But then you look at like social media use in teenagers and you find out that it has these destructive effects on their mental health.
Yeah.
And their mental
Inarguably.
well-being.
Yeah.
And like people's ability to like have long attention spans, like their dopamine receptors get fried by these things. So I think a lot of culture and policy and governmental action is really about like keeping people from engaging in these like short-term destructive things, keeping businesses from like pursuing short-term destructive
Yeah,
profits.
we could call them like, broadly speaking, I think it's fair to call these externalities. These are all negative externalities of doing
Yeah.
business that aren't directly accounted for in the profit or loss or whatever of any given business. And this is literally the reason why government exists as a check on private industry sometimes. It should be able to deal with these types of problems. Like environmental damages. Companies don't pay anything for environmental damages, so maybe cap and trade is a good way to deal with that, or something like a carbon tax, just something to make there be some actual cost of harming society, because right now you don't usually pay a cost for it, and oftentimes unfortunately you can be rewarded for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is why I'm not like on the super libertarian side where
Mm-hmm.
they don't believe in like any restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think we can clearly see how private companies are incentivized to sometimes create these business models that are really destructive.
Mm-hmm.
And like you said, they're externalizing those costs onto broader society
Yeah.
rather than having them incorporated.
Mm-hmm.
Have you read anything about the SNAP benefit discourse?
All I've seen are people basically wondering. I'm gonna be honest. I wonder this too when I walk by certain stores, like how, or is am I? Maybe I'm not. Maybe this isn't what it's right now, but it has to do with like how people can basically use Snap on like fast food or like candy and shit, right? Yeah. Somebody, did you follow Bloomberg at all? The guy that ran.
Yeah, a little bit.
Okay, he seems like a really smart guy. When I've listened to him talk, he says a lot of stuff where it's like, this guy's really smart. I don't know why none of that translated to anything he said on the campaign trail, because oh my God, was he a fucking buffoon. But I heard him talk once about a sugar tax before, and he brought up something. He said something. You know what I'm talking about?
No, but I'm
Oh, he
sugar
basically
tax.
he was arguing with somebody, yeah, and somebody brought up like, well, I don't know, Bloomberg, like I don't know how I feel about sugar taxes. They're very regressive, and Bloomberg was like, good, they should be. There should be some kinds of regressive things on society because like poor people are adversely hurt by these way more than anybody else. Rich people aren't hurt as much by sugary foods and shit. They tend to have healthier lifestyles, tend to have healthier diets, tend to be less stressed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like these things do hurt poor people more. It's okay if some taxation is regressive if we're trying to demotivate certain individuals in society from engaging in certain behavior. And I thought that was an interesting point that most people aren't willing to like stake out a position and say something like that.
Well, we talked a little bit about Sockdom left earlier, but like I was talking to him on Twitter, just in like a group DM. And one of the points that he made, which I thought was quite insightful, was that if you are creating these like taxes on ingredients that aren't nutritional or creating like tax incentives for nutritional food, then you might be able to, allow SNAP benefits to apply to any kind of food. But on the other end, you're increasing their price through taxes or creating an incentive for these health food companies to just like modify their ingredient lists to be more healthy and more beneficial for people.
I think that's okay though. The second part, I bring this example up a lot. I remember it was really funny that in my high school, a long time ago, we were having debates over whether or not fast food should be served in schools or not. I'm 33. I don't know if this is still a debate or if it was settled or whatever in high school or in schools in general. And I remember that in my high school, there were new guidelines I think that were released across the country saying that like, oh, okay, well if you want to, we're only going to allow these types of foods to exist in schools anymore. We're not going to let like these fast food companies, blah, blah, blah. And then people got really ass mad because all of like the fast food people, like basically slightly modified their stuff to make their food a little more healthy so that people could sell fast food in schools. And people got really mad at that they were still showing up in schools. But I was like, well, I thought that was the point. Like, isn't it better now that they've made their stuff more healthy so that now people can buy them? Like, if we make a hoop for you to jump through and you're willing to jump through the hoop, then I think that should be considered a success. Like, it's a policy success, right?
Yeah, totally. And so like if the tax burden on sugary food results in like fast food companies changing their nutritional makeup so it's healthier, then great. Then like good that the SNAP benefits still apply to them
Yeah.
and that, poor people can get food paid for by the government and that food's going to be healthier. So, and that was like a solution that I wasn't necessarily thinking of because I was, just caught up in the discourse. But like to his credit, I think that was pretty insightful.
Like I think if you ever go to the UK, and I can't do this because I'm an American, but if you go to the UK and you ever drink a Coke, holy shit, they taste like ass, okay? Because Coke has modified its formula in the UK to not have as much sugar. I think it's like 10 or 15 grams in a bottle of Coke versus like 40 or 50 in the West. It's dramatically different. But I'm sure that like people in the UK at some point probably don't notice anymore. They're like, oh, okay, whatever, it's just like Coke. So I think I would say that like a positive, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's good because I think some things you need to sacrifice sometimes, some
course.
pleasure in life
You have to,
for
yeah.
benefit. And one of my problems with like the left is this constant insistence that like people just should have access to like
Everything.
whatever pleasures they
Every
want.
person should have everything in life that they want, maybe hopefully without even having to work. Yeah.
Yeah. No, yeah, because I think there's like someone on Twitter is saying that like it's oppression for the government to like not pay for fast food for people to eat. And that is like shocking to me because it's like only in America could like, or only in this like modern age can it be considered like oppression to like not have food paid for you of like a specific kind
Yeah.
that is, you know, somewhat unhealthy.
Everything is oppression. Everything is white supremacy. It gets a little tiring to read it so
It
much.
was called authoritarianism, to be
Oh,
clear.
gotcha.
But yeah, cool. Good talking, Stephen. You're going to be on the Dylan panel, right?
Fuck, is that tonight?
No,
Oh. Yeah,
it's
I will
like
be.
in a few days.
Are you like doing politics now on Twitch?
I'm trying to get into it.
Okay, good.
Do you have any advice for me?
Yeah, keep going. Okay, I'm
Keep going.
growing my new community of master debate people. Okay, that are more center right. I don't know if you're center right or not, but
I would say so.
debating with communists and shit is so fucking boring. I hate it so much. So having more grounded discussions about shit, I think, is infinitely more entertaining.
I'm a little bit shocked. I don't know. I expected you to have a different sort of outlook on democracy a little bit.
I think that
I thought I was going to fight with you a lot more.
I think what needs to happen more is I think that we have to match our descriptive realities because people are totally disagreeing there. And then once you've matched that, then you go off into another direction prescriptively. But the issue is that people are so fucking afraid of like everybody's so binary. Like you're either good or you're bad. So like if a Republican comes up and it's like, okay, he's bad. And then a Republican says something like really easy access to drugs for people might cause more people to do drugs. It's like, no, impossible. You have to fight on like every single fucking point. You can't concede anything. Like, like maybe it's the case that women aren't as happy today. No, wrong. Women are more happy than they've ever been in the history of the world. It's like, okay, Jesus, fuck. So yeah, I think that even being willing to meet on like descriptive grounds and then move from there is something that a lot of people are incapable of doing these days. To be fair, it happens on the right too, but the left is kind of the predominant cultural power right now. So I see it happening more on the left and Twitter or Twitch, YouTube and all that shit than I do on the right. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know what causes that necessarily. But I think you're right. There's like an insistence that every part of it needs to be fought, like every step of the way. And it makes conversations very difficult.
Stupid and a waste of time. Yeah. It just gets so ridiculous.
I can't believe, Destiny, you're grooming me to be a center-right debater,
Wait,
to
how
fight
old
the
are you?
lefties. I'm 21.
Oh, okay. Dude, chill. You're ungroomable. Okay. That's only prior to 18. So
Yeah, fair enough.
once I got you and then Lauren Southern and her friends over here, it's just gonna be a fucking Nazi fest. All right. Dude, have
Just
we
like
ever?
as many insane blonde women as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Sure. Let's go with that. Have we on our first conversation? Did we ever talk about the stuff related to like gender identity and shit?
A little bit, a little bit.
Do you have a feeling? I feel like we did, but we didn't much. Do you have any? Do you know who Demon Mama is?
Yeah, yeah. I talked with her, or I talked about her a little bit with someone.
Have you ever tried to debate her before?
No,
Have you asked her?
I did send her a message asking to debate, but I feel like she's a really good debater, like much better than me.
Oh, maybe you should try it then and see what happens. Okay.
Okay.
Your expectations are very high, but I think it would be interesting to see. Yeah.
Well, I think that I like struggle a little bit with like rhetoric sometimes, where I don't know, I'm like comfortable with the ideas, but like I'm not sure that I look super good when I'm making the positions always, because like this is something that like Mr. Girl, I've like watched him a little bit, and he's like very aggressive.
Yeah.
And I'm like not aggressive at all. And I'm like, I tend to like capitulate a little bit or like moderate things when I talk about things. So I don't know if that plays well in the online debate space.
I think it kind of that's super context dependent on what you're arguing. Like there are times where I'm critical of Mr. Girl because he is very aggressive, but I think it doesn't work. I think it actually destroys the conversation. He fucks up really hard by trying to be too aggressive. And then there are other times where he's more aggressive and it works really well. I think he's learning to like find his pace there. I think he's doing a good job at figuring it out too.
Yeah, it's sort of cool to watch. I was on a panel with him and I could definitely tell that he was like frustrated by not being able to like really engage with people and like dig down on things one to one,
Mm-hmm.
just because panels are like so, they can be so chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
And that was definitely one of them. It was hard to get a word in edgewise.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Well.
Wait, but why did you bring up Demon Mama about like gender identity?
Oh, it would just be fun. I hate none of these people will talk to me anymore because they're all scared as fuck about it. So it'd be interesting to see people that think similarly to me go and challenge them on it. I'm just curious how those arguments would go. I feel
I
like a
would
lot
love
of
to.
there's like a weird thing that happened in the left over the past year or two where do you know how Gotham used Batman and then they got rid of him when they were done with him?
No.
That's what they did, okay? That's what they did. That's what the left did to the debate bros, okay? They used us and then they tossed us out. Now they hate us, okay? It's interesting that the left is taking this weird anti-intellectual bend where like, you don't need to do debate. That's just for losers. We don't believe in that and blah, blah, blah. And like, they'll even say that like, oh, like the mainstream opinion scientifically, it's oppressive and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, it's irritating because like anytime I argue with any of these people, they're like so sure of everything they're saying. They're so insane. And if I argue with like an educated person, we don't really argue. We usually like agree over everything. It's like, fuck, like why can't you? I connect you two people together. Like I want to hear Demon Mama talk to like an actual clinical or research psychologist. Like, let me hear this conversation. But they refuse to engage in that. They don't do those. It's just like a bunch of preaching to the audience of like dumb shit, and it's irritating and annoying. Yeah.
So I think it's all power politics, right? It's all about like how do you advance the agenda?
Exactly. You
And
don't care about what is true or correct or more right. It's just
yeah,
like what gets you the most influence.
right. I think this is the problem with like putting, your philosophical or political vision up on a pedestal as some sort of utopia, right? Because it justifies doing anything to get to it, even if that's incredibly destructive.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll think about it. I'll try to debate her.
Um, did you like Trump more than Biden? Who would you voted for if you did vote? I don't know
I
if you-
voted for Biden.
Oh, okay. Base. Okay.
Yeah. I was really disappointed. I mean, not only with the Trump presidency, but also with his like rhetoric around COVID, especially early on. And now I think that like the progressives are a little bit insane on COVID, to be honest. But that's only because like we've gotten, vaccines are like widely available. So I think that if you are getting seriously sick at this point and you're like unvaccinated, I think that might be more your problem than the government's problem.
Maybe. Yeah. Okay. Well.
A little bit dangerous to talk about on the internet, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Destiny, you should debate her on COVID. Wait, what does that mean? Uh-oh. Do you think
I
the
don't think I have
vaccines don't
super
work,
controversial
or-
opinions. I'm pro-vaccine.
Oh.
I think mask mandates are a little bit cringe.
You don't they help a lot?
Uh, I would argue no. So there's a lot of data to suggest that KN95 and N95 masks are effective, right? They're good at stopping transmission and spread of COVID. There's no randomized control trial data on the
Normal
effectiveness
cloth masks or
of
whatever?
cloth masks. So I think that mask mandates, if they mandated a certain kind of mask, would be probably very effective. But as long as they're mandating any masks and they're allowing people to use like dirty, reused cloth masks, I think their effectiveness is severely weakened. So I'm a fan of them if they're done right, but like realistically, they're not done right. And so I think they're much harder to justify.
Maybe. That might be the case. It wouldn't surprise me from, I hate to use like the common sense thing, but like obviously if you sneeze into a mask, you can feel droplets are caught in it. But you might still transmit, but maybe at a lower viral load, like maybe less gets through, but yeah, that is true.
Right.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure.
And
I
that's
don't know.
possible. It's just like hasn't been demonstrated
Sure.
with cloth masks specifically, that's a hard point to make because it's like it's very technical. It's very specific to like one type of mask. And that's a nuanced sort of conversation, which is hard to have.
Yeah.
But in general, I think my positions on COVID were like a major reason for voting for Biden. So I don't think they like are super correlating to Republican positions right now.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else, chat, that I'm missing?
You're not going to get in trouble for irresponsibly platforming me.
Yeah, I've platformed a lot worse than you. Don't worry. Well, maybe I don't know. Actually, I don't know your positions. Can I ask? Okay, you post like sexy stuff sometimes on Twitter. Can I ask a sexy trans question?
Yeah.
I'm curious. I've never looked this up before, and you don't have to answer this personally or not. But I'm curious in general. For male to female trans women that have boobers, the majority of the time do those result from taking hormones, or is it usually hormones plus top surgery?
Mine are just hormones, but a lot of
Wait, what
people
did
would
you
get
just
top
say?
surgery as well.
Minor can be hormones?
Mine are just hormones.
Oh, okay.
But like, I mean, so you can get them from hormones.
Mm-hmm.
Usually they're not like super big if you get them from hormones, but yeah, so you can get them from hormones.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. That's almost what I was curious about. All right. Anything else?
Sexy trans question. Okay. No, that's it. Thank you so much for talking, Stephen.
Yep. Have fun. Be careful. Stay safe. And good luck on your panel.
Thank you.
Bye.